measure, I idolatrous. Okay, such things in some measure idolatrous. Idolatrous, like an idol. She saw, I suppose, the doubt in my face, for she put the rosary around my neck and said, "For your mother's sake," and went out of the room. I am writing up this part of the diary whilst I am waiting for the coach, which is, of course, late, or the crucifix itself. I do not know. But I am not feeling nearly as easy in my mind as usual. If this book should ever reach Mina before I do, let it bring my goodbye. Here comes the coach. The 5th of May. The castle. I think this is all just his diary right now. 5th of May. The castle. The gray in the morning has passed, and the sun is high over the distant horizon, which seems jagged. Whether with trees or hills, I do not know, or I know not, for it is so far off that big things are a little mixed. I am sleepy, and as I am not called till I wake, naturally I write to my dinner
then
exactly.
There's cum and Jonathan shit and piss everywhere.
I dined on what they called robber steak. I dined on what they call robber steak, bits of bacon, onion, and beef seasoned with red pepper, and strung on sticks, and roasted over the fire in a simple style of London's cat's meat. The wine was golden midiash, which produces a queer sting on the tongue, which is, however, not disagreeable. I had only a couple of glasses of this, and nothing else. When I got on the coach, the driver had not taken his seat, and I saw him talking to the landlady. They were evidently talking of me, for every now and then they looked at me, and some of the people who were sitting on the bench.
Bottom text.
And for every now and then they looked at me, and some of the people who were sitting on the bench outside the door came and listened, and then looked at me, most of them pityingly. I could hear a lot of words often repeated, queer words, for there were many nationalities in the crowd, so I quietly got my polyglot dictionary from my bag and looked them out. I must say that they were not looking cheered to me, for amongst them were Ordog, Satan, Poko, Hell, Stragoisa, Witch, Vrovak, and Vrukosak, which both mean the same thing, one being Slovak and the other Servian for something that is either werewolf or vampire. Mem, I must ask the Count about these superstitions. When we started, the crowd round the inn door, which had by this time swelled to a considerable size, all made the sign of the cross and pointed 2 fingers towards me. With some difficulty, I got a fellow passenger to tell me what they meant, and he would not answer at first. But on learning that I was English, he explained that it was a charm or guard against the evil eye. This was not very pleasant for me, just starting for an unknown place to meet an unknown man. But everyone seemed so kind-hearted and so sorrowful and so sympathetic that I could not but be touched. I shall never forget the last glimpse which I had of the inn yard, and its crowd of picturesque figures, all crossing themselves as they stood round the wide archway, with its background of rich foliage and oleander and orange trees and green tubs clustered in the center of the yard. Then our driver, whose wide linen drawers covered the wide front of the box seat, Gossa, they called him, cracked his big whip over the 4 small horses, which ran abreast, and we set off for our journey. I soon lost sight and recollection of ghostly fears in the beauty of the scene as we drove along. Although I had known the language, or rather languages, of my fellow passengers, which my fellow passengers were speaking, I might not have been able to throw them off so easily. Before us lay a green sloping land full of forests and woods, with here and there steeping hills, crowned with clumps of trees, or witch farmhouses, the blank gable end of the road. Drove by, I could see the green grass under the trees spangled with the fallen petals, and in the amidst there, green hills, of which they call here the Middle Land, ran the road. losing itself, and as it swept round the grassy curve, or was shut out by the straggling ends of pine woods, which here and there ran, but still we seemed to fly over it with a feverish haste. I could not understand what the haste meant, but the driver was evidently bent on losing no time in reaching Borgopbrund. I was told that this road is in summertime excellent, but that it had not yet been in order after the winter snows. In this respect, it is different from the general run of roads in the Carpathians, for it is an old tradition that they are not kept in too good of order. Of old the hospodars would not repair them, lest the Turks should think that they were preparing to bring in foreign troops, and so hasten the war, which was always really at loading point. Beyond the green swelling hills of the Mittelland rose mighty slopes of forest up from the lofty steeps of the Carpathians
of the
themselves.
population.
Right and left of us they towered, with the afternoon sun failing upon them and bringing out all the glorious colors of this beautiful range. Deep blue and purple in the shadows of the peaks, green and brown where grass and rock mingled, and and an endless perspective of jagged rock and pointed crags, till these were themselves lost in the distance, where the snowy peaks rose grandly. Here and there seemed mighty rifts in the mountains, through which the sun began to sink. We saw now and again the white gleam of falling water. One of my companions touched my arm as we swept round the base of a hill, and opened up a lofty, snow-covered peak of a mountain, which seemed, as we round on the serpentine way, to be right before us. "Look, it's in Zek," which means God's seat, and he crossed himself reverently. As we wound on the endless way, the sun sank lower and lower behind us. The shadows of the evening began to creep around us. This was emphasized by the fact that the snowy mountain top still held the sunset, which seemed to glow out with a delicate cool pink. Here and there we passed Czechs and Slovaks. And it's not Czechs, it's Czechs. In all picturesque attire. But I noticed the goiter was painfully prevalent. By the roadside were many crosses, and as we swept by, my companions all crossed themselves. Here and there was a peasant man or woman kneeling before a shrine, who did not even turn round as we approached, but seemed in the self-surrender of devotion, to have neither eyes nor ears for the outer world. There were many things new to me, for instance, hayricks in the trees, and here and there very beautiful masses of weeping birch, their white stems shining like silver through the delicate green of the leaves. Now and again we passed a lighter wagon, the ordinary peasant's cart, with its long snake-like vertebra calculated to suit the inequalities of the road. On this were sure to be seated quite a group of homecoming peasants, the Czechs and their white, and the Slovaks and their colored sheepskins, the latter carrying lance fashion their strong staves, with axe at end, and as the evening fell, it began to get very cold, and the growing twilight seemed to merge into one dark mistiness, the gloom of the trees, oak, beech, and pine. Though in the valleys which ran deep between the spurs of the hills, which, as we ascended through the pass, the dark firs stood out there, and there against the background of late-lying snow. Sometimes, as the road was cut through the pine woods, that seemed in the darkness to be closing down upon us, great masses of grayness, which here and there bestrewed the trees, produced a peculiarly weird and solemn effect, which carried on the thoughts and grim fantasies engendered earlier in the evening. When the falling sunset threw into strange relief the ghost-like clouds which almost the Carpathians seemed to wind ceaselessly through the valleys, sometimes the hills were so steep that despite our driver's haste, the horses could only go slowly. I wished to get down and walk up them, as we do at home, but the driver would not hear of it. "No, no," he said, "you must not walk here. The dogs are too fierce." And then he added, with what he evidently meant for a grim pleasantry. He looked round to catch the approving smile of the rest, and said, "And you may have enough of the matters before you go to sleep." The only stop he would make was a moment's pause to light his lamps. When it grew dark, there seemed to be some excitement amongst the passengers, and they kept speaking to him, one after the other, as though urging him to further speed. He lashed the horses unmercifully with his long whip, which cries of encouragement urged them on to further exertions. Then, through the darkness, I could see a patch of grey light ahead of us, as though it were a cleft in the hills. The excitement of the passengers grew greater. The crazy coach rocked on the great leather swings, and swayed like a boat tossed on a stormy sea. I had to hold on. The road grew more level, and we appeared to fly along. Then the mountains seemed to come nearer to us on each side, and to frown down upon us. We were entering on Burgos Pass. One by one, several of the passengers offered me gifts, which they pressed upon me with their earnestness, which I could take no denial. These were certainly of an odd and varied kind, but each was given in simple faith.
Never stop fighting for what you believe in.
Well, for one, I'm actually going to take a sip of my drink and probably some crackers. They aren't crackers; they're barbecue chips. I'm not healthy. They're barbecue chips. I'm so sorry. Okay.
Wait, can like this stream hear us?
What could you say?
If the stream can hear us.
Is the stream confused?
No, I didn't. I snuck on a little water.
That's what Nappy does.
I said, I'll write it down.
You'll write it down? Oh, you mean type it? This is snack time right now, thank you. I have a crippling addiction. Can the stream hear us? I think I can, but it's only like 2 people. It's only like 2 people.
Oh, okay.
I think. I'll double check. 0 people!
It's an Overwatch.
Okay.
He said his health isn't water anymore. I got invited to a game, but I'm watching that.
I have spotted the enemy.
I'm going to continue reading. Yeah. Okay. Where was I? One by one, several of the passengers offered me gifts, which they pressed upon me with their earnestness, which would take no denial. These were certainly an odd and varied kind, but each was given in simple good faith, with a kindly word and a blessing, and that same strange mixture of fear-meaning movements, which I had seen outside the hotel at, Bistre's, the sign of the cross and the guard against the evil eye. Then, as we flew along, the driver leaned forward, and on each side of the passengers, cranking over the edge of the coach, peered eagerly into the darkness.
I made someone join. Let's go.
Let's go.
Yeah,
That's Pog.
Get back.
God, imagine the smell of Gordon asshole, just imagine it.
It was
2000 years of
it was evident that
accumulated
something
farts
very
and
exciting.
shit all compressed, fermented and saved up foe.
Yeah.
I might need this later. Hey, I'm out of here.
Ah, sorry. Okay. It was evident that something very exciting was either happening or expected. But though I asked each passenger, no one would give me the slightest explanation. This state of excitement kept on for some little time, and at last we
Sorry
saw
for
before the
that I
pass
was
opening out
bored.
on the eastern side. That's okay. There was dark, rolling clouds overhead, and in the air the heavy, oppressive sense of thunder. It seemed as though the mountain range had separated two atmospheres. And now I'm dead! And now that and now we had got into the thunderous one.
Thank you.
I was now myself looking out for each.
You have my thanks.
Oh, hold on. I was now looking. Oh man, it is laggy. Okay, okay.
Group up with me.
Sitting down. Okay. Okay. I was now myself looking out to the conveyance, which was to take me to the Count. Each moment I expected to see the glare of lamps through the blackness, but all was dark. The only light was the flickering rays of our own lamps, in which the steam from our hard-driven horses rose in the white cloud. We could see now the sandy road lying white before us, but there was on it no sign of a vehicle. The passengers drew back with a sigh of gladness, which seemed to mock my own disappointment. I was already thinking what I had best do, when the driver, looking at his watch, said to the others something which I could hardly hear. It was spoken so quietly and in so low a tone. I thought it worse than my own. There is no carriage here. The heir is not expected after all. He will come on Bukovina, and return tomorrow or the next day, better the next day. Whilst he was...
Thank you.
I died. Whilst he was speaking, the horses began to neigh and snort and
Old
plunge
soldiers
wildly,
are hard to
so that the driver,
Thank you.
the naked chin from Fairly Odd Parents, okay, that the driver had to hold them up. Then, amongst a chorus, sorry, oh. Then, amongst a chorus of screams from the peasants and a universal crossing of themselves. Stop killing me! You guys, stop! Stop! You're killing, stop! I'm gonna, I don't want to die. Let me live. I'm trying to read. Whilst he was speaking, the horses began to neigh and snort and plunge wildly. Fuck. I keep losing myself here. I mean, frick. Can't swear. Then, amongst a chorus of screams, the peasants and the... Yeah, okay. Then, amongst a chorus of screams, the peasants and a universal crossing of themselves, a caleche with 4 horses drove up behind us, overtook us, and drew up beside the coach. I could see from a flash of our lamps as the rays fell on them, that the horses were black-hulled and splendid animals. They were driven by a tall man with a long brown beard and great black hat, which seemed to hide his face from us. I could only see the gleam of his pair of very bright eyes, which seemed red in the lamplight. As he turned to us, he said to the driver, "You are very early tonight, my friend." The man stammered in reply. The English heir was in a hurry. To which the stranger replied, "That is why, I suppose, you wished him to go on to Bukovina. You cannot deceive me, my friend. I know too much, and my horses are swift." As he spoke, he smiled, and the lamplight fell on the hard-looking mouth, his very red lips and sharp-looking teeth, as white as ivory. One of my companions whispered to the line from Berger's Leonore, "Den die Todren rieken schnell," for the dead travel fast, is what it translates to. The strange driver evidently heard the words, for he looked up with a gleaming smile. The passenger turned his face away, at the same time putting out his 2 fingers and crossing himself. "Give me the heir's luggage," said the driver, with exceeding alacrity, my bags were handed out and put on the caleche. Then I descended from the side of the coach, as the caleche was close alongside, the driver helping me with a hand which caught my arm in a grip of steel. His strength must have been prodigious. Without a word, he shook his reins, the horses turned, and we swept into the darkness of the pass. As I looked back, I saw the steam of the horses of the coach by the lamp of the lamps. By the lamp of the lamp? By the light of the lamps, and projected it against the figures of my late companions crossing themselves. Then the driver cracked his whip and called to his horses, and off they swept on their way to Bukovina. Stop trying to kill me! As I sank into the darkness, I felt a strange chill, and a lonely feeling come over me. But a cloak was thrown over my shoulders, and a rug across my knees, and the driver said in excellent German, "The night is chill, mein Herr, and my master, the Count, bade me to take all care of you. There is a flask in Silviovitz, the plum brandy of the country, underneath the seat if you should require it." I did not have any, but it was a comfort to know it was there all the same. I felt a little strangely, and not a little frightened. I think had there been any alternative I should have taken it, instead of prosecuting that unknown night journey. The carriage went at a hard pace straight along, and then we made a complete turn and went along another straight road. It seemed to me that we were simply going over and over the same ground again. I killed myself. And so I took a note of some salient point, and found that this was so. I would have liked to have asked the driver what this all meant, but I really feared to do
You're
so,
not getting rid of me that easily.
for I thought that, placed as I was, any protest would have had no effect in case there had been an intention to delay. By and by, however, I was curious to know how time was passing. I struck a match, and by its flame looked at my watch. It was within a few minutes of midnight. This gave me a sort of shock, for I suppose the general superstition about midnight was increased by my recent experiences. I waited with a sick feeling of suspense. Then a dog began to howl somewhere in a farmhouse, far down the road. A long, agonizing wailing, as if from fear. The sound was taken up by another dog. And then another and another, till, borne on the wind, crap, I friggin' lost myself because somebody joined. Then a dog began to howl somewhere in a farmhouse far down the road. A long, agonizing wailing, as if from fear. The sound was taken up by another dog, then another and another, till, borne on the wind which now sighed softly through the pass, the wild howling began, which seemed to come from all over the country, as far as the imagination could grasp it through the gloom of the night. At first howl, the horses began to strain and rear, but the driver spoke to them soothingly, and they quieted down, but shivered and sweated as though after a runaway from sudden fright. Then, far off in the distance, from the mountains on each side of us, began a louder and sharper howling than that of the wolves, which affected both the horses and myself in the same way. For I was minded to jump from the caleche and run, whilst they reared again and plunged madly, so that the driver had to use all his strength to keep them from bolting. In a few minutes, however, my own ears got accustomed to the sound, and the horses so far became quiet that the driver was able to descend and to stand before them. He petted and soothed them, and whispered something in their ears, as I have heard of those horse tamers doing, and with extraordinary effect. And under his caress, they became quite manageable again, though they still trembled. The driver again took his seat, and shaking his reins, started off at the same pace. This time, after trees, which in places arched right over the roadway, till we passed as through a tunnel.